The high desert training range stretched flat and endless under a white morning sun. It was barely 6 in the morning, but the heat was already rising in slow waves from the sand, blurring the horizon where the land met the sky. This was not a place built for comfort. It was a place built for testing people, for finding out who could stay calm when everything around them tried to shake their focus. Near the observation tents stood 40 Navy SEALs, gathered in loose formation, talking quietly among themselves. These were men who had survived deployments most people could not imagine. They had crossed oceans, jungles, and mountains in the name of duty. They did not impress easily, and they did not expect to be impressed today either. They were here to watch a long-range precision shooting demonstration, part of a joint training exercise meant to bring different military branches together and share skills. The morning schedule listed the first shooter simply as Staff Sergeant E. Vasquez. Nobody in the crowd recognized the name. When she walked out toward the firing line carrying her rifle case over one shoulder, a ripple of quiet murmurs moved through the group of SEALs. She looks so young. Is that the shooter, or just someone helping set up the range? Wonder if she will even hit the closest target. Elena Vasquez was 26 years old. She had spent 3 years as an Army sniper, years filled with early mornings, brutal training, and long nights studying wind charts and bullet trajectories, until the numbers lived permanently behind her eyes. She was the only woman scheduled to shoot that day, and she was used to the quiet doubt that followed her onto every range she had ever stepped onto. She had heard it in training camp. She had heard it during selection courses where instructors quietly expected her to quit. She had heard it in briefing rooms where men twice her size assumed she was there to take notes, not to shoot. She had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that arguing back never changed anyone's mind. Only one thing ever did: results. So instead of looking toward the whispers, she walked past them, her boots crunching softly against the dry ground, her eyes already scanning the terrain ahead. Beside her walked Corporal Reyes, her spotter, a calm and steady presence who had worked with her for the past 2 years. Together they had trained through freezing mountain mornings and blistering desert afternoons, learning to read each other without needing many words. They reached the firing line and began preparing without hurry. Elena unpacked her rifle carefully, checking each part the way she always did, treating the weapon less like a machine and more like an old, trusted friend. Reyes set up the spotting scope and the small handheld wind meter, watching the dust and heat waves dance across the range to get an early read on the conditions. The course laid out before them was known among long-range shooters as one of the hardest in the country. 12 steel targets were scattered across the desert floor, some flat and open, others tucked behind rises in the land or partially hidden by shadows. The distances ranged from 1,200 meters, which was already far beyond what most rifles could shoot with confidence, all the way out to 2,800 meters, a distance so extreme that many experienced shooters considered it close to the edge of what a rifle and a human eye could achieve together. Earlier in the week, other soldiers had attempted the same course. Most had managed to hit somewhere between 6 and 8 targets before the wind, the distance, or their own nerves got the better of them. 2 shooters had been completely stopped by the 2,600-meter target, unable to even locate it clearly through their scopes, let alone hit it. The desert had a way of humbling people who thought they had already mastered it. Elena lay down on her stomach, settling into the shooting mat, adjusting her position until her body felt balanced and still. She rested her cheek gently against the stock of the rifle, closing one eye, opening the other, to the world seen only through glass and crosshairs. Around her, the noise of the observers faded into the background. The 40 SEALs, their doubts, their whispered comments, all of it dissolved until there was nothing left except her breathing, the wind, and the small steel shapes waiting far in the distance. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out. This was the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times, in classrooms, in fields, in her own bedroom late at night, when sleep would not come, and her mind needed something steady to hold on to. Breathing was the anchor. Everything else was built on top of it. The first target sat at 1,200 meters, a shorter distance by the standards of this course, but still far enough that most rifles in untrained hands would miss by wide margins. Reyes called out the wind. his voice low and even. Wind from the left, 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12. Elena adjusted her aim slightly, accounting for the wind's gentle push against the bullet's long flight path. She let out half a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger, with slow, deliberate pressure, rather than a sudden pull. The rifle cracked. A second later, a clean metallic ring echoed back across the desert as the bullet struck steel dead center. A few of the SEALs exchanged glances, some impressed, others still cautious. One good shot proved little. The real test was still ahead. Target after target, Elena moved through the course with the same unhurried focus. At 1,500 meters, she adjusted for a slight uphill angle, accounting for how gravity would pull the bullet differently than it had on flat ground. At 1,700 meters, a sudden gust threatened to push her shot wide, but Reyes caught the change early, calling out a correction just in time. Elena adjusted instantly, trusting her spotter completely, and the shot rang true. By the time she reached the fourth target at 1,800 meters, something in the atmosphere around the observers had begun to shift. The murmuring had quieted. A few SEALs had drifted closer, arms crossed, watching more intently now, their earlier assumptions starting to crack under the weight of what they were witnessing. Elena did not seem to notice the growing attention, or if she did, she never let it interrupt her rhythm. Between each shot, she and Reyes spoke in short, quiet exchanges. Numbers and corrections passed back and forth, like a private language built from years of trust. Wind speed, mirage direction, bullet drop, spin drift, that small but real sideways push caused by the spinning of the bullet itself, something that mattered more and more the farther the target sat. At 2,100 meters, the seventh target on the course, a strange stillness fell over the desert. The wind, which had been shifting unpredictably all morning, seemed to pause. Elena used the moment without hesitation, taking her shot in the brief window of calm. The steel rang out clearly across the flat land, and this time, a few of the SEALs actually nodded to themselves. Quiet acknowledgments passed between veterans who recognized skill when they saw it. By the eighth target, resting at 2,300 meters, the crosswind had returned with force, gusting unpredictably between 15 and 20 miles per hour. This was the kind of wind that could push a bullet meters off course by the time it reached its target, turning a perfect shot into a complete miss. Reyes studied the mirage rising off the desert floor, the shimmering heat lines bending and twisting in ways that told an experienced eye exactly how the wind was moving at different points along the bullet's long path. "Hold 2 mils left," he said quietly. "Wind is inconsistent past the halfway mark." Elena adjusted her aim, trusting the correction completely. She breathed out slowly, found her natural pause, and fired. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 full seconds before the sound of impact reached them, a small eternity where nothing was certain. Then the target rang, and someone in the crowd of SEALs said quietly, almost to himself, "She's not missing." Word seemed to spread through the group without anyone needing to say much at all. More SEALs made their way toward the firing line, some standing just behind the observation area, others crouching low near their commanding officers, all of them now fully focused on the young sniper who moments ago they had barely noticed. The 9th and 10th targets, at 2,400 and 2,500 meters, tested not just her shooting but her patience. At this distance, every small mistake became magnified. A slightly wrong wind call, a breath held half a second too long, even the natural tremor of tired muscles could send a bullet sailing wide. Elena took her time with both shots, refusing to rush despite the growing audience now watching her every move. Both targets rang true, the sound arriving late but unmistakable, confirmation that patience had paid off once again. 2 targets remained. The 11th sat at 2,600 meters, the very distance that had defeated 2 shooters earlier in the week, stopping them before they could even properly locate it through their scopes. Elena took a slow breath, steadying herself, aware without needing to be told that this was where the course began, separating skilled shooters from truly exceptional ones. Reyes studied the terrain carefully, cross-checking his numbers twice before speaking. Distance confirmed. Wind holding steady from the left, 10 miles per hour. Elevation adjustment locked in. Elena settled her aim, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. the familiar stillness that came just before a shot she had already fired 1,000 times in her mind during quiet moments of practice and preparation. She exhaled halfway, held her breath, and fired. Nearly 3 seconds passed in total silence, the bullet traveling far beyond what the human eye could easily track. Then, faint but clear, the sound of steel meeting steel rolled back across the desert. The crowd of SEALs, 40 strong, now gathered close around the firing line, broke into quiet applause, a few of them shaking their heads in genuine disbelief. This was no longer simple curiosity. This was respect, earned the hard way, one difficult shot at a time. One target remained. The 12th and final target sat at an almost unbelievable 2,800 meters, a distance where the bullet's flight time alone stretched past 3 full seconds, where the shape of the Earth itself, curving ever so slightly beneath the bullet's path, actually had to be factored into the calculations. Few shooters in the entire military had ever successfully hit a target at this range under real-world, unpredictable wind conditions like these. Elena felt the weight of the moment, though she did not let it show. She glanced briefly at Reyes, who gave a small, steady nod, the kind of silent reassurance built only through years of shared experience and trust. They worked through the final calculations together, voices low, focused entirely on the numbers rather than the growing crowd or the pressure of the moment. Wind speed, elevation change, spin drift. The tiny, almost invisible effect of the Earth's rotation on a bullet traveling such an extreme distance. Something most people would never think to consider, but something that mattered greatly at this range. Elena settled into her final position, feeling the familiar rhythm return, the same steady heartbeat that had carried her through 11 targets already. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. The world around her narrowed, until nothing existed except her breathing, the faint distant shape of the target, and the quiet certainty built from years of discipline. She fired. The sound of the shot cracked sharply across the open desert, then faded into an almost unbearable silence. 3 full seconds passed, each one stretching longer than it should have, long enough that a few observers began to whisper that the shot had missed, that the bullet had drifted wide somewhere in that vast, empty distance. Then, faint but unmistakable, the steel rang. 12 targets, 12 hits. A perfect run across one of the hardest long-range courses in the country, completed by a shooter half the crowd had dismissed as a rookie less than an hour earlier. For a moment, the desert stayed silent, as though even the wind itself paused to acknowledge what had just happened. Then the silence broke completely. Applause rose from the crowd of SEALs, genuine and unrestrained, mixed with low whistles and impressed murmurs passed quickly from one soldier to another. "That's not a rookie," one of them said loudly enough for the entire line to hear, and several others nodded in firm agreement. One by one, the SEALs began walking over toward the firing line, no longer holding back their earlier doubts, offering handshakes and quiet words of respect instead. Men who had spent their entire careers being among the most capable people in any room now stood waiting patiently for the chance to shake the hand of a young Army sniper they had almost completely overlooked just an hour before. Elena accepted their handshakes with quiet grace, never boastful, never seeking attention for herself. When someone asked how she managed to stay so calm under that kind of pressure, she simply nodded toward Reyes and said that none of it would have been possible without her spotters' steady calls and their years of practiced trust between each other. She spoke about preparation, about the thousands of hours spent training long before this single morning, about treating every shot, no matter how difficult, as simply another problem to be solved calmly and carefully. She packed away her rifle case the same way she had carried it out to the range, without ceremony, without needing anyone's validation to know what she had just accomplished. But something in the atmosphere around her had clearly changed. The quiet doubts that had followed her all morning had been replaced entirely by respect, earned not through words, but through 12 difficult shots fired calmly across an unforgiving desert landscape. Word of what happened that morning spread quickly through the wider military community in the days that followed. Soldiers from different units, different branches, different backgrounds began hearing the story of the young Army sniper who had silenced 40 SEALs without saying a single boastful word, letting her rifle and her calm discipline speak clearly enough on their own. Elena Vasquez was never again introduced simply as a rookie. She had proven, in the clearest way possible, that skill did not depend on assumptions, and that quiet confidence built through years of dedicated practice could outshine any amount of doubt placed upon her before she had even fired a single shot.